Good afternoon and welcome to the Finance, Budget, and Personnel Committee meeting of Tuesday, August 3rd, 2021. First order of business is to identify potential conflicts of interest. You've seen the packet and you've reviewed it. Is there anything in there that you feel you might have a conflict with? If there is, please let us know now. We're seeing a bunch of indications to the negative, so we'll move on. Citizen comments. At this time, we would invite any citizens who have comments about items that are perhaps are not on the agenda. We invite them up to the podium. I see no citizens in the audience, just staff members. So we're going to skip that and go to the consent agenda. And the consent agenda tonight, what? Oh, Mr. Baker, do you have comments to make? You would forgive me for not knowing that after all these years. You appear here so often, I think you live here, but that's good. So anyway, consent agenda, minutes of July 20th, 2021 meeting, monthly position control report, and bills and payroll. That's in your packet. If you had a chance to look at it, if so, motion by Becky, second by, I'll second. Who seconded? Oh, Nick, okay. Second by Paschal to approve. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, so carried. And there are no items removed from the consent agenda, so item number 6 is request Common Council approve it of Budget Resolution 05-2021, writing off certain uncollectible special charges, presented by Ron Allman. Ron, go ahead.
Thank you. In your packet, you have a memo talking about some special charges that we are carrying on our books as accounts receivable. In the past, what we've done is we budgeted $10,000 a year, and every year we just write off $10,000. And that's when we did a kind of a deeper analysis of that, that's really lagging behind the actual amounts. And in the memo, I kind of walked through the steps. So it's for things such as ordinance where, streets has to plow their sidewalks or weed control and those kind of things. So we bill it to them with late charges. Once it goes delinquent, it goes on the tax bill. And the ones we're talking about here went on the tax bill, that also went paid. And then in several cases, the county takes the property, sells it. It covers property taxes first, and then these special charges are kind of last in line. So at that point, they haven't paid, they've generally lost the property, and we really don't have any recourse. So if you look at the list, some of these items from 2012, 2013, we've taken the property, the person's deceased, one's dissolved LLC. So it's just, we really don't have any very, very high likelihood of recovering any money. So for the accounting point of view, we write them off as our books, but we still keep them for if something would come up where we're able to collect, we still would. But just for financial presentation, we'd like to write these off to make our accounts receivable, to me, reflect a little more what's actually collectible. So it's got the list of details. So the budget resolution would write off $75,261. And then from there, I think our $10,000 a year would probably be good again for quite a while, but would watch it a little bit more budget to actual. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Any questions? What are your wishes? Move to approve the write-off, the second by Ms. Spiros. No discussion. The only thing I'd like to, we see this from the other side, down at the county every once in a while, and just last month we took sheriff's deed or sheriff's certificate on, I think, 22 different properties, and a number of them were in Marshfield. And one of them had I think one of them is on here because it had a charge, I think, against it of $17,000 for the demolition of the building itself and clearing of the property. So that was one that the county took back also. So, and we get to see these twice. So, any other questions? If not, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, so carried.
Thank you.
And next, item number 7, request to recommend council approval to increase administrative specialist library to full-time status, presented by Jill Porter. Hi, Jill.
Hi, thank you, Chair. After receiving approval from the library board at its June 15th meeting to replace 2 part-time administrative assistants with 1 full-time administrative specialist, I am seeking your approval to do the same. Until June of this year, our administrative office has been staffed by 1 28-hour administrative assistant, 1 10-hour administrative assistant, and me. And in June, the 10-hour assistant took a position elsewhere that paid more money and requested to be moved on-call status. Since that time, I've been covering both my position and the administrative office for 12 hours a week. It's a little bit crazy because my administrative assistants handle our personnel and financial records on a day-to-day basis. They keep up with the record-keeping requirements for the board and also act as a buffer between me and every salesperson and public member who stops by. As you might guess, it's not a particularly efficient way to work, and it's also been very difficult having the 2 part-time staff members. I feel like I'm spending more time explaining to them what happened the prior day than actually getting work done and moving the library forward. So with that, I recommend that this committee also approve moving the library administrative specialist Carrie Rucker to a permanent full-time status, and I would be happy to answer any questions you have.
What's your pleasure? Motion by Spiro, second by Handler to approve. Questions though? You had a question. Go ahead, Rebecca.
So you're 28-hour
And 10. So 38 hours I had.
So you're taking 8 hours.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Any other questions? Mr. Handler, did you? No. All right. If there are no other questions, we have a motion and a second on the floor to approve the increase of the administrative specialist to the full-time status. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, thank you, Jill. Next up, item number 8, request to recommend council approval to submit human resources generalist position to McGrath for compensation evaluation. Jen Recco. Jen, go ahead.
Thank you. So in your memo, there's a request to increase the administration department by 1 FTE. If you look from a historical perspective back at the department, it has consistently consisted of the city administrator, a human resources position, and then a shared administrative position that supports the mayor, human resources, and the city administrator. If you remember a little earlier this year, we had taken through that administrative assistant or administrative specialist HR assistant position to give it some additional responsibilities and to free up some time really for me in terms of adding things like military leave, some of the COVID tracking pieces, taking on more comprehensive leave duties in general, as well as some I-9 maintenance, and then some administrative functions like the taxi duties and continuing with the municipal code and CIP and budget and those types of things. So I just want to be transparent that we're looking at this as an additional position in addition to those adjustments that were made earlier. So in looking at the department in general, keep in mind that back in 2010, there used to be one other part-time position that was part of this department as well that was eliminated when a retirement had come up. So in looking at the position in and of itself and looking at what the position would do, what I'd like to do is bring somebody in that would be responsible for really full cycle recruitment. So everything from doing the initial intake to setting up the interviews, to doing the interviews, to the job offers, and just a more comprehensive professional level position that would kind of incorporate all of that. And it would include then, once the person's on board, doing the new hire orientation, benefits information, some of those base level, entry level, or employee entry work. In addition, I think we would have them look at our compensation. They'd be working with compensation in general with those offers. So I'd like to see them work with the seasonal compensation. That program really needs to be revamped, and I think this would be a good opportunity to do that. And then take on additional projects or work so that we can continue to move the HR department forward. So at this point, we're not looking for a request to approve the position. The job description is in your packet. I'd like, if possible, to take that to McGrath for a compensation evaluation. I anticipate we're looking about a $50,000 base salary mark if we were looking at a full-time position, but I'd be certainly open to potentially less than that. But ultimately, what we're looking for at this point is just your approval to submit the job description to McGrath for a compensation evaluation for consideration for the 2022 budget.
Questions? Mr. Wetzel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I realize you're not asking to fill a position, but you're asking to find a pay scale, meaning that you're going to be looking to fill the position. If that time comes, or when that time comes, what occurs to the administrative specialist / HR assistant position? Because what it seems like is that, and I haven't been around the city that long, but I think I've been in this position about 6 years. We've gone from a part-time HR director and a part-time human resource individual to a full-time HR director and a part-time HR assistant sharing responsibilities with administrative specialist. And now we're yet looking to do another potentially full additional position. And I'm a little surprised by the rapidness, I guess, more recent rapidness of this growth. I realize COVID takes a lot of effort. I'm hoping that it's not something that we have to continue to live with for years and years. I guess I'm a little confused as to why we're so rapidly ramping this up.
Sure. So I can go back. So I've been with the city, it'll be 6 years in November. When I started, the position was slotted as a human resources manager assistant to the city administrator position. So it was a 75-25 split. And as we got into that position, prior to that, it had been a human resources manager that had been a full 1.0 FTE without the assistant piece. And Steve, you can certainly jump in if you'd like. Ultimately, when we came in and went through that position for the first couple of years, we realized that the ability to take on additional administrative assistant positions or assistance to Steve was really not possible with the amount of work that was required from a human resources standpoint. So Amy's position, the HR specialist / HR assistant, right, or I'm sorry, admin specialist, HR assistant, had always been this shared position. And as we looked at it, you know, when we cleaned that position up, it had gradually taken on more and more HR duties, even during the interim while before my position was filled, and after the prior HR manager had left, and then retained some of those, and that was built into the job description when I came. So when we got here, we evaluated, I want to say in 2016, that position, and kind of cleaned up what the responsibilities would be and made sure that they were all accounted for. And then this past winter, what we did is we looked at that position. They have been responsible for leave management in general, in terms of, you know, any type of surgeries or childbirth or any kind of standard leaves that had gone forward. And then what we did back in January is I've always been responsible for more of those advanced leaves. So if there was accommodation requests, duty disability, military leave, all of the COVID pieces that went on, I had taken responsibility for those. So what we wanted to do is transfer all of that and create this position to be a little more focused on leave and yet still have the ability to support the city administrator and the mayor, knowing that those are key pieces too. So with this, you know, what I would like to do is be able to free up to work on the higher level HR responsibilities. There's things that I think we can do better as a city. And really, in looking at the full scope of the job, I think the best route would be to really focus on the recruitment piece. So recruitment has been fairly heavy. I did look at statistics and look to see what our average rate, so it's 23.2 positions per year that we're filling, whether it's new hires, whether it is transfers or promotions. When we're going out and we're looking at those, it's a pretty big chunk of time when you're talking about, you know, 3 to 5 to 6 interviews per position, doing the intake session, doing the job offers, the compensation, the references, all of those pieces. So I would fully anticipate the administrative specialist would continue to help with those. But this position would be someone who is coming out of school with a bachelor's degree and some experience. So they've got a more foundational level of some of the other aspects of HR, whether that is compensation, whether that is the employment laws and federal regulations in regard to employment and recruitment. They would have a base level in benefits so that as we're doing orientation, they could take on some of those. I would fully anticipate that we would restructure at some point in the future. But I anticipate we'll probably have turnover within the department sometime in the next 1 to 5 years. So this would not necessarily be a forever thing, but it would certainly give us an ability to get things on track that I've been hoping to get on track for a period of time and just haven't been able to with the workload that exists today.
If I may continue.
Oh,
So you said you started out 75-25 split. I'm assuming the 75 was HR and the 25 was assistant to the city administrator.
It was.
You increased by 25%. Again, does that mean then that the administrative specialist HR assistant position becomes strictly administrative specialist again? Or does that individual or does that position remain as is with then this coming in?
I would anticipate that position would remain as is.
Okay. And you said there's a lot of recruitment. Does our city HR department also recruit for police and fire, or is that recruited within the department?
There's, I guess, a combination. So with the fire department in particular, they work with NTC, Fox Valley, and then they do some internal recruitment as well. So for those positions, I certainly participate in all of them. So they get the candidates in those cases. We've come up, and Scott primarily in this case has come up with the questions or has transferred over questions that had been there in the past in terms of setting that up. I do participate in the interviews. I do the offers. We do the references and the background checks and the scheduling of pre-employment physicals, drug tests, psych evals, those types of things.
And then for police?
Police, pretty much same way. We actually hire through the city, and then they also can apply through WileyNet, and we get those applications as well. Other than that, the recruitment process for police is actually a committee that the police department has set up for the initial level of interviews. And then for most, I sit in on the chief's interview for the final assessment of the candidate, and then they do their background check, but we do the offer letter, put everything together, again, the pre-employment and post-hire.
Okay, and one final question.
Sure.
You commented here that this position that you're looking to get evaluated, this HR generalist position, you're looking at being, and correct me if I'm misstating this, but it sounded like you were saying this would be a short-term position in which you could get caught up on some of the things that are happening. And it's a very specialized position from what you're saying, a bachelor's degree in a specific area with a certain amount of experience. So it seems odd that we would spend a lot of time trying to find just the right candidate who's going to be only with the city for a short term to fill a gap.
Yeah. So what I would anticipate is that we would look to fill this position either in a part-time or full-time capacity to start with, depending on what would potentially be approved. As we get ready for some transitions within the department within the next 1 to 5 years, I would anticipate that this position may become more encompassing, and then we would re-review the admin specialist HR position at that point. But in the meantime, our current incumbent has a great skill set, and I'd like to keep her as is, and she's doing well with the additional responsibilities. So I'd like to keep that in place.
Okay, and I guess I did one more question, if I may, Mr. Chair.
I would not stop you.
Thank you. One of the things that I think you stressed is that there's been a lot happening. I guess I'm wondering, have there been additional duties that you've been tasked with outside of the area of HR with all of the things that have been happening in the city that is causing us to have this need where if those things were not occurring, you would not necessarily have such a strong need?
Well, obviously the last year has been very heavily HR focused with some of the items that we've dealt with, including COVID amongst others. And so that has done a little bit of a setback in terms of, priorities that we wanted to move forward on. I wouldn't say that would eliminate, but I certainly think there are things that we could better expand upon. For example, some of the areas that I think we're lacking, honestly, is training and development. I think performance management you're going to see as an area that we need to work on, where we can do more, not only from the onboarding section of employees coming into the city to the performance reviews, to the succession planning and looking at goals to be able to move people through the city, help retain them, ensure that they're up to date with compliance issues, ensure they're being trained on HR related duties, whether that is, a new supervisor coming in and taking on, recruiting for their department, or it could be how the compensation program works, or it could be, benefits in general in terms of working with employees and making sure that they understand fully what their benefit packages are. So it's not that we're not doing the work now, we could just do the work better.
I guess I'm referring to additional duties that are not necessarily HR related, but are perhaps more politically related.
No,
Open record requests.
I wouldn't
like
say that that's the case.
That was the one,
No.
open records request. Yeah.
Oh, well,
Yeah, that's the one.
Sorry.
Yeah, open records request is the one.
I would anticipate that the open records request will probably go down as there's less, I guess,
But that has-
controversial items going on.
That has caused a problem. That's
It
part of
has.
the reason why you're a little bit backed up.
It is.
Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
Steve, you want to jump in?
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to clarify on the part about where Jen's starting position was assistant to this, human resources manager / assistant to the city administrator. I've had a lot of good ideas. I like to think in my time in government, that was not one of them. That was not well-founded. When the previous human resources manager, Laura Bear, left, there was a little time in between to do some thought. And I had the hope of having somebody who could work with me on special projects, maybe 20% of the time, and that would really help me in some meaningful ways. I could help grow that person in ways that would be helpful, hopefully, to their career as well. But I learned very quickly in Jen's time that, HR is a demanding area, and it's just growing. The Affordable Care Act, federal and state mandates, changes in benefit laws, changes in, you name it. It's only growing, what we get out of Madison and Washington, and it's not going to quit. So that was a good idea, but ill-founded, I think. And what I've seen with Jen's work in the last few years, even apart from COVID and some of the other issues we went through in the past 12 months, the level of work that she has to deal with in that position, the number of directives and mandates and laws that have to be, dealt with it from an employment standpoint, has grown and is going to continue to grow. So I guess I just wanted to clarify that it wasn't like she was ever working 25% in that assistant to the city administrator role. It never happened. It was a good idea that never really came to pass.
Ms. Spiros?
Thank you, Chair. So I have a couple of things. I just need to think this through in my own head. It sounds like you need extra help. I mean, it's what you're coming to us and saying. And my only concern is I feel like, this is a whole position, it's benefits, it's salary, it's all of that when it comes down the pike. I mean, right now we're just asking for it to go to McGrath, which I don't have any issues with, but in looking to the future and actually hiring this person, there's an expense related to that and we're on a tight budget. But my bigger concern is that I think there are other areas that could use extra help also. And I'm wondering, I mean, I see this is going to alleviate the strain you're under in your department. But I don't know how many more people we can keep hiring. And I feel like there's a need in other departments too for other people to be hired. And that's the only reservation I have. And I don't know that you can even answer that or say anything about that, but I'm just thinking out loud as to what my thought process is.
Before Steve has a stroke, go ahead.
No, that's a really great question. I just want to remind everybody, we really haven't hired anybody in this latest wave yet. I know we've had to replace a lot of people on streets and we've had a lot of recruitment going on, much of it because of resignation or retirement. But along with this one, you'll now have seen 3 positions that may come forward as part of the budget process. I may be able to include them in the proposed budget. I may not be able to. We have the one with the Wenzel Family Plaza. We have the GIS specialist and this position. Believe me, as Ron could tell you about the status of the 2022 budget, it's going to be tight again. So again, I want to really clarify the fact that what you're being asked today to do is to send this to McGrath for placement on the pay scale. What actually makes it into the 22 budget is yet to be seen. Jen knows this. In fact, the other 2 individuals I mentioned it to, or mentioned in those other positions, they know it as well. Certainly, I think Jen's hope is if it doesn't get through in 2022, maybe it does in 2023 or a subsequent year, because, we're facing challenges, which you already know. But I do agree 100% with her that there's tremendous merit to this position and there's tremendous need in terms of really moving us to a better, stronger, more proactive place in HR.
Mr. Handler?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree that Jen's position has really grown, perhaps more so than other positions. But one of the things that concerns me is that with the litigation that we have with the clinic, and we don't know the outcome of it yet, And we're already in a tight pinch, so to speak, in terms of budgets. I don't know if we should go that far ahead. And I guess I'm rather conservative, okay? And I want to wait and see how this thing with the clinic develops, because the worst case scenario is that they are going to be successful in parts of it. There's no getting around to it. They have better lawyers than we do. So I would rather, pass on this request is what I'm getting to because of the uncertainty down the road.
Nick,
I guess my opinion is that all we're asking for is to see where this would be slotted in the compensation scale. It's not asking for approval for a new position. It's just asking for where would this position fit in? I don't think we can make a decision down the road unless we know where this is going to fit in. So I guess I would make a motion to send it to the council for approval to submit a draft for compensation evaluation.
we have a motion on the floor. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Seconded by Ms. Spiros. Excuse me, I would like to make a couple of comments before you start over again. First of all, I want to address what Nick just said, because anybody that's been around here long enough knows one of my pet peeves is how we as elected officials sometimes get the boil the frog technique from the staff, and that is, we take one step, oh, you don't have to do anything, we just take this one little step here and one little step there, and pretty soon we find out the water's too hot and we can't back out. So we become the boiled frog in this thing. And so I'm a little hesitant about that. That's number one. Number two is, as most of the members of the council know, we recently had reason to look at the structure of the administrative staff, of the upper administrative staff. And I think there was some consensus that there needed to be a reorganization of the upper administrative staff, especially in trying to relieve the workload on the city administrator himself, not only of the HR person, but of the city administrator himself. I think that is a far greater priority than what Jen is presenting to us tonight, in my mind. And what I'd like to see Steve come back with a reorganization plan for, primarily reducing the number of reports. I can't remember, you got, 11 reporting to you or more than that?
It's 11, I'm not counting a lot right now.
Yeah, so, and the point is, we feel that that's hindering his ability to do certain things, or to basically give things the time that they need, the attention they need. So what I would rather, I'm going to vote against this only for the reason that I would like to see Steve come back with a report that includes this, because HR needs to be looked at also. The county, we have four people working in HR in the county. We've got 690 employees, and they do sometimes 40 or 50 hires a month. So, there's a way of looking at that where we're developing a system for administering the HR department would be helpful. And maybe a division of labor is a good thing, but I'd rather see this combined with some overall reorganization. And I am not trying to be hard-nosed about it. I'm just saying that I think we should put our arms around the whole problem and not try and knead it piecemeal, or boil the frog either. Mr. Wetzel, you had anything else to say?
Yes, thank you. Listening to the members of this committee, I fully agree with Mr. Paschal. I think, what does it hurt to, find out what's it going to cost? My concern, however, is we're given an idea. This is the scale, this is the ballpark. We don't fill it for a couple of years, and now all of a sudden we're being asked to resubmit it because we really don't know if we're still within the market value, and so now we're spending more money to get another evaluation when we're finally ready to fill the position. So the concern that I have is putting the money forth now just to get a ballpark, when we sort of already, I think, have a ballpark. You're saying probably around 50,000, only to find out in another whatever length of time it takes for us to get this into a budget that maybe our estimate needs to be reevaluated, and it's more costly yet again to go to the same consultant to say, are we still in the right ballpark? And that would be my area of concern. It doesn't hurt to know. At the same time, if we're really looking at some significant other areas that really need to be addressed first, I guess I'm not in a big hurry to rush to get a designation just for fear that it would become obsolete down the road.
Ms. Spiros.
Okay, so there's a lot of good points being made, and it's kind of what I was alluding to also was that there's a bigger picture here to look at, obviously. But what is the cost for doing this, submitting it, McGrath?
150.
150. You know, I'm going to vote in favor of this. I'm going to, you know, trust the judgment of our HR director, and I believe she has a need. I believe she's genuine with that. There are other needs, and perhaps when we look at a difference in the org chart, we can maybe look at that and find some way to get some help, both to the administration and to the HR HR director. $150, I'm okay with that. Get her the information she's looking for. She's come to us, she's asked for it. I think that for her to do her job, she needs to have the information she's $150.
Anybody else? Mr. Fisher would like to be recognized. Does the committee object, or without objection, Mr. Fisher will be recognized?
I've never stood here before, so this is different. But I just wanted to make a few comments. I really do agree with Alderman Peschel. I see no harm in actually looking at this. I guess my only question would be to Jen, if you did do this, does this committee or the council, are they able to review it before, let's say it were to go directly into the budget? I mean, do they have another kick at the can, or once they approve this, as I am assuming Chairman Wagner is kind of implying, is it pretty much out of their hands and it's in the budget, and then if they want to remove it, they have to remove it from the budget?
But that's probably more for me,
Sure.
Actually, Adam. Well, I guess the answer theoretically is the next time you would see it would be the budget. But again, that's a big hurdle because, as I mentioned, it's one of 3 new positions that's being requested. And, you know, we don't necessarily have, you know, all the money to do everything we'd like to here, as you can imagine. We've been through some tough budgets, and we're still facing a structural budget deficit going into this year, much better position than we've been at the last couple of years, but still a challenge for us. So you may or may not see this position in the proposed budget, you know, regardless. I have to sit down. I'll be spending a lot of hard time at my desk trying to see what the priorities are and what can be fit into a budget that may be acceptable to this body and your peers on the other half of the council. But from a process standpoint, yes, well, truthfully, I'm wrong, because the report from McGrath would come back to this body for review. I forgot that, Jen. So you would get to see that, you get to see where it's being placed. You might look at it and say that placement on the pay scale looks reasonable, or you have questions about it. That would still be a part of the process.
And if I may, Mr. Chairman?
Proceed.
All right. I was actually hoping you would say that, Steve, the latter part, because then before it even gets to the budget, this committee at that time does not believe that there's a value in moving that direction. The committee then could say, we want to take a hold on this. And if I heard it correctly, it's just over $100, which in the 150, excuse me. But even in government terms, that's pennies on the dollar with what we're dealing with. So I just would like to voice my support for this. It doesn't mean that it's going to go anywhere, but I think we need to find out so that you can make a more informed decision later. So those are my opinions. Thank you.
And I apologize for my initial response. I wasn't thinking, I was thinking farther out. And yeah, I know, Jen, usually it takes at least a couple weeks to get something back from McGrath, but you will see it again here in this very meeting.
Any further discussion? We have a motion and a second on the floor. The motion was by Paschal, seconded by Spiros, to approve the request to send this out for evaluation. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Nay. 4-1, I think. Okay. Okay, thank you, Jen. Okay, next up, I think you still got the floor. Request to recommend council approval to use accrued sick leave during the staff COVID-19 quarantines.
Thank you. So we are looking to see some new illnesses and exposures of COVID-19. I'm not certain if it is the Delta variant or standard, but we have had people out for those reasons. If you remember right, back in 2020, we had put in some policies that were required under federal law, under the FFCRA. And so when we put those in, it was paid time off that people would have up to 80 hours. And we did some emergency responder sick leave as well. Those were required by law that we put in place, not the emergency responder sick leave, but the other policies related to it. Those have expired as of the end of the year, and I'm not asking to put those back in place. However, what I would like to do to help people avoid financial hardship if they're quarantined is to be able to allow them to use up to 2 weeks of their own accrued sick time for their time away from work. The way the policies read today, if they're ill, they can use their sick time for their own serious illness, or if they've got a family member, who they're caring for under certain circumstances. For the non-represented employees and the there are a couple of variations that are not quite the same for our represented groups. However, what they can do is use up 5 sick days to care for a family member in some cases. What I'm looking for here is strictly those areas where they're quarantined to be able to use that sick time, so that if they can't come to work, they don't have to use all of their vacation, comp time, or personal holidays for that purpose. So it's a temporary relaxation of the policy. I wouldn't be making any changes to the policy. We kind of keep this in our COVID files as we have in the past, and allow people to use up to those 2 weeks. And I specifically termed it as 2 weeks versus 80 hours so that it would apply to police, fire, and our non-rep group. So at this point, staff would recommend a temporary relax the sick leave policy to allow employees to utilize their own accrued sick leave for quarantines due to COVID-19 illness or exposure, not to exceed 2 calendar weeks of scheduled shifts from the date of quarantine.
What's your pleasure? Mr. Handler?
Motion to approve.
Is there a second? Second by Mr. Wetzel. Discussion. Mr. Wetzel.
Thank you. Can you very quickly explain to me what the current sick pay situation is for those non-represented employees? How much sick time do they get? Is it cumulative? What is the situation?
Sure. So for a full-time employee, non-represented, they would accrue 8 hours of sick leave per month that they're actively employed. If they start their employment after the 15th of the month, they don't receive it for that first month, but if they start before the 15th, they don't. Same thing with retirements or resignations. They wouldn't get it for those months that are less than half the month.
And that comes out to 96 hours a year?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Cumulative?
Maximum bank is 960 hours for that account. Keep in mind, we don't have a short-term disability policy, which is, I believe, why that was in place.
And what happens upon retirement?
We have a handful of grandfathered employees. I want to say there are somewhere between a dozen and maybe a dozen and a half individuals with the city that were grandfathered as of December 11th to December 31st, 2011, where they get that paid out if they've met certain thresholds. So they have to retire with more than 20 years of service, they have to be WRS eligible, and then that money would go into a PEP account for them. For everyone else, it's forfeited at the end of their employment if they've not used it.
Really, there's no incentive then for those that don't get paid out to not just take a whole bunch of sick there. Okay. And one final quick question for clarification. Is there a limit to how many of these 2-week quarantine periods they can take within a given amount of time? Is it, I can take 2 weeks, I go back to work, oops, I'm exposed, I'm taking another 2 weeks, I go back to work, oops, I'm exposed, and is there,
I didn't put that in. You know, I think we didn't see any abuse of that in the past, even when it was paid time. So I didn't have a concern from that perspective. I would think that if we would have somebody who would unfortunately have to go through multiple quarantines, I think we would want to allow them to use their sick leave if they didn't, or if they did have that accrued in their bank.
okay, that's all I had, thank you.
Mr. Paschal?
I just have one concern about this is, you know, and we do hear this a lot in the news and everywhere, is the number of people who have elected not to be vaccinated. And I guess I would have a lot of concern for someone, and I understand that even someone who is vaccinated can be exposed and be required to quarantine, but I guess my concern is if someone's elected not to take the precautions, prevent themselves from getting sick, why should we be paying them when they do get sick?
Right. Well, and I fully do expect that this is going to be fluid and things may change as we see increases in the area. Right now, the way it works is if someone is vaccinated and they are exposed, they're not required to quarantine at all. So really, this is the people that are exposed. It's 10 days from the last day of their exposure, technically 14, but they can return after 10 if they're symptom-free for that period. Or if they go in on day 6 or day 7 following their last exposure and get tested and it's negative, they can return to work in the next following day.
Are there any other diseases that we require employees to be vaccinated?
We don't require. So we have, you know, the flu vaccination we always bring on site every year. For our police and fire, when they do their pre-employment and they go through titers. So if somebody doesn't have, you know, the varicella or something like that, they would
I know I got
Yep.
hepatitis shots.
Yeah, that one's
But I
optional.
don't know it was required or option, but I got the shot.
Yeah, so we don't require anywhere unless it's post-patient care where they have to have them in place. So.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so this is, they already have the earned sick time, so they earned it already. You're just asking us if they have COVID, can they use their earned sick time?
If they're quarantined without actually
Right.
having COVID, yes.
Okay, so, and there's a reason that we quarantine people who, you know, have been exposed. Obviously, that's to prevent it from spreading all over your building. I feel like they've already earned this. It's COVID. I don't think we can put any, you know, any caveats on whether somebody's been vaccinated or not vaccinated, because this is still the United States of America, and that's still a freedom of choice at this point. So I don't like that idea whatsoever. I mean, I'm vaccinated. I chose to do that, but you know, that was my choice and my option, especially with things that have not been approved by the CDC. So I would, let's see, I would make a motion for staff to approve the temporary relax of the sick leave policy to allow.
Who made the original one, Deb?
Am I making a motion? Is that what I'm? Oh, we already have one.
Amber
Oh, never
and
mind.
Maxwell already made the
I'm
motion.
1 day short and 1 day late and $1 short.
Yes, ma'am. And it's Tuesday, the 3rd. Okay, done. All right. Okay, is there any further discussion? If not, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. Okay, and you got one more. Telework.
Thank you. So the telework policy that is in your packet was actually put into place during COVID as well. So put in place last year to allow employees to work remotely in the event that they were ill or quarantined and had the ability to do so. So really, this policy expired at the end of the year. What we'd like to do is reenact the policy. There's a couple of adjustments that are included in the red line version that's in your packet. It's just clarifying that this is a temporary policy. I don't know that we want to keep this in place forever. However, that could certainly be subject to review later. The other clarification is that they must have appropriate access to internet, and the cost of that internet service is really going to be at the cost of the employee, as we're allowing people to do this, but not requiring it. And then the references to the Family First Coronavirus Response Act are all removed from the policy. So what I'd like to do is put this policy back in place with the recommended changes. And And that is my request.
Moved by Spiro, second by Handler. There's something here, it says, employees will not be reimbursed for internet costs associated with telework. If adequate internet access is not available at the telework, anyway, it may be denied. So we're not reimbursing them for, I thought I read in here somewhere where they were being reimbursed for that. Is that correct?
No, what this allows people to do is if they're quarantined and they can't work and their job responsibilities allow them to work from home, is that they have the ability to work from home without having to take time off, either unpaid or using their sick vacation or personal holiday time.
Okay. Mr. Wetzel.
Thank you. You commented this is while they're quarantined. Is that the only time this telehealth policy?
I wouldn't put that requirement on it. You know, we have had some cases where we've made some accommodations on a temporary basis, and they've been very limited. But if we've had someone who's had a family member who's been ill and they had ability to work remotely, we've wanted to do that so that they could still meet the needs of the city and meet their family obligations as well, probably on a more limited basis. So there's definitely a value to having this. We're not at a point right now where we're saying anyone can telework whenever they want all the time. You know, we want to be able to be flexible when needed, but we're looking for temporary at this point.
About a year and a half ago, when everything kind of got moving in a big hurry here, did we have more people teleworking just to try to limit the number of people within City Hall? And is that something potentially in the future? I'm not saying it's going to get that bad, but will this policy cover that also?
We did. So we did try to allow people who had an ability to telework to do that, especially when City Hall was closed. But, you know, depending on what their circumstances are, we used it quite a bit for quarantines and then tried to be flexible otherwise. So it would work for that without having to be modified. But if we were going to do that on a more regular basis, we'd certainly work with Steve on that. Or if you would request, bring it back to this body to provide an update.
And then one final question, if I may, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead. Mr. Paschal needs to speak too, though.
Okay, I'll be quick. Does this put certain individuals at an unfair advantage regarding the quarantine situation because they are able to telework and therefore would not be required to use sick pay, and some others are not able to telework, therefore they have? I mean, is this equitable for our staff?
Well, it's equitable to the point that it can be. I mean, not every job that we have has the ability to work remotely, or is there a business need for people to do that? But for those that do have that ability, it certainly helps the city to be able to keep our operations continuous, even if they can't be at the work site.
All I needed, thank you.
Mr. Paschal.
Jen, you said that this had expired at the end of the year. Is there an expiration on the re-implementation?
I didn't put an expiration on it. Like I said, I think it's one of those policies that we'll continue to review. If things get better or worse with COVID, we can certainly look at it as a possibility, for special things like family leaves or scenarios like that. The other thing is at some point in the future, you may want to consider, do we want to have people working remotely on a more regular basis if the business need allows? So this allows that flexibility if there's no expiration date on it.
Okay. So we had yes, Mr. Spiros.
Jen, you've used this in the past for the last COVID, the start of COVID. Any productivity issues?
Actually, no, none that I'm aware of. We've had people be able to work remotely. We haven't had a lot of connection issues. No, it seems to have worked really well. And honestly, I think I've heard kind of a mix of comments. Some people felt that they were more productive because there isn't the interruptions of the daily traffic that you otherwise get. So I wouldn't say it's a loss at this point.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a motion in a second. Steve, go ahead. Sorry.
Thank you. Just following up on a couple of points, starting with the one that Tom made. We did have some department heads who were out because we did indicate, as you mentioned, that, with COVID, it might be better to have fewer people in the building. I think Governor Evers was actually saying things that would suggest the fewer people you had in the building back in those days, the better. But over time, I did find out that there were individuals who were teleworking who came back and ultimately did say they preferred to be back in the building as a better connection with their peers and the people that they were working with. But having said that, going back to the productivity question, I did kind of ask department heads to monitor this, and I think Jen maybe did it as well, certainly trying to make sure that they were able to tell the world that people were performing the work that they needed to do so remotely. And there were no concerns about that. In fact, I heard some of the same things that Jen said, that in some cases, people thought they maybe were a little bit more productive if they had a good setup at home that they could work from, because they didn't have the distractions around them that they might at the office. So those are both positives.
Anybody else? If not, we've got a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So carried.
Thank you.
Okay. Jen's vocal cords get a rest now. So. Okay, I had a request from Alderman Fisher and to bring before the committee a discussion of the job description and role of the communications director and the role of the communications department in general. So I'm going to let Mr. Fisher ask what he'd like us to discuss and talk about, and then we'll have a kickoff from there. I see you brought Tom Laux with you too, so.
Well,
good.
yeah, not by,
Right.
didn't force him in the room. But no, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The reason I had asked to have this on the agenda, just for some background, is I did have a conversation with Steve about the communications department, about the communications director position. And just in that conversation, and Steve can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I realized what Steve and I were kind of saying. I think there were some differences I don't want to say differences of opinion, but differences on what maybe he was saying the role of the communications department was versus what I thought the role of the communications department was. And so after leaving that conversation over a few days, just a period of a few days, I started going, well, if I'm questioning what I think the role of the communications department is, are my peers starting to question what is the role of the communications department? And to be completely transparent, the reason that conversation started was at the Aquatic Center, someone else was emceeing the event. And in my mind, that was the role of the communications director, to be more involved in that event. And through that conversation, I started to go, well, you know, maybe I'm the one off in left field or not, but I just felt that it should really, the Finance, Budget, and Personnel Committee should discuss it, since it is a personnel matter, since it is really a direction of the department, and then maybe even have this be a discussion that eventually goes to the council. And so that's why I reached out to Chairman Wagner and asked to have it on the agenda. Thank you.
Tom, do you have anything you'd like to add at this point, or do you want to wait?
I would like to.
Okay. Anybody? Oh, Rebecca, please.
Okay, I'm going to jump right in here. I also was under maybe a different impression of the communication department and the communication director. This was a lengthy discussion back when we decided to bring this department in-house. And I feel like I am not seeing as much come out of our communication department as I would like to be seeing. I don't see as much content. It looks like, according to this essential job function, which I kind of briefly went through, certainly Tom is doing what's on this list. That's not a question, I don't think. I have certain questions. I see like one of them is creates and implements marketing, advertising campaigns. And I think that he's not been doing all of those. I've seen a lot of advertising and marketing campaigns go, and he's not involved in it. I also was disappointed, and this is not to be personally offensive to anyone, but I was disappointed that it was not our communications department that emceed that huge event, that generational ribbon cutting of the pool. I figured when we got a communication director and when we got a communication department, that the communication director would essentially be the face of the city. And I'm just not seeing your face enough, Tom. I want to see your face out there more. And I'm questioning our I want to know from Tom, are you getting all the information you need? Are you doing all the things you want to be doing? Is this role fulfilling what you thought it was going to be when you came into the city? And I guess that's kind of that's a lot of things, but that's kind of what I need to know or want to know.
And while Tom's getting up there, I'd say that I tried for a number of years, I think like 4 years when I was on the council before, to institute a communications department. And I think Steve was with it. We went over to, we took some of the members of the, what was then the cable TV committee, and Steve and I went over to Oshkosh and visited with their communications department and talked about how they were organized. I always thought that's how we were going to organize, because basically the city of Oshkosh is protected from errors in legal errors and liability for copyright violations or violations of FCC codes and things like that by having everything go through the communications department. And that doesn't seem to be what's happening here. And I looked at the job description and looked at it. I wasn't here when this was done. And I was like, well, how did they miss this? You know, and I'm wondering how that happened. But anyway, I'd like, that's what my impression is also. And Tom, I'll yield the floor to you and you can take it away.
All right, thank you. I'll answer Rebecca's question. Are we getting the information needed to communicate out to the citizens, the council, staff? I have to say no. We are not. We need that. A lot of it is structure on what the communications director can do. And right now, as we've always heard this, departments do their thing. Department heads run their departments. And yeah, I run the communications department, but the communications department is a department for everyone. It's not a department of public access. Mm-hmm. And that's the direction that I have tried to change for quite some time since I was here. Anybody in my, so that's a hard change. It's a change that's needs to be done if you're looking for consistency across all departments. There is a cohesive message that is created that way. It's very hard to do that if there's someone that isn't guiding that. If you don't have a communications director position, then it probably would fall on a city administrator position because it's an overall position. So I look at it as it needs to be more of an overall, similar to HR, Steve, even IT in a way, because IT director is a position that is here for all city. It's quite different than being focused as maybe a park and recs director. So to answer your question, we need more information, more collaboration. We can seek it out. Is that what we should be doing? Should we be watchdogs? We can do that, but then that turns us into be more of a media entity rather than a team player.
Go ahead, Ms. Girls.
So Tom, I'm hearing what you're saying. I'm looking through a couple of these and I just want to bring them up specifically. Writes, edits, and distributes news releases for the city. Do you write, edit, and distribute all the news releases for the city?
I don't do all, no.
What
I do some.
Do you do?
As in writing, probably 40, 30, 50, or 30%. A lot of them may come as a draft form, done. Please send this out. Some departments probably understand that I'm going to make some changes, but again, they have the chance to see a draft before the final goes out. I think that's important, that the department head or the individual that's requesting this service to make sure that the message is, there's no confusion in the message. So am I creating, 30, 40, there departments, some departments are doing their own, and you may have seen those, or they're not being done really at all. I think that's the biggest thing, is they're not being done when they should be being done. And waiting. So, but again, it's not just a press release. That's why I think that's really the last piece we should be worried about.
Right, I'm just doing this as, I'm just trying to go through. So for instance, for me, so we just got an email the other day to tell us that the water feature at the downtown park would not, unfortunately, be ready to go. There's a backup of parts. Okay, so the water feature is no longer working, will be out for the rest of the season. Did you put out a press release to the citizens to state that? And if so, where did you do it? Where can we find it?
Okay, so I was on vacation last week, but I saw a email that went out to, I think, you and all users stating what you just said, but no direction if that department wanted a news release. It was basically, here's the information to everybody, because you really don't want to overstep someone's bounds, especially at a department level. I wasn't here. David did put out something on our front page of our website. I did see that. So that's all I know at this point that was put out. Should more? Most definitely. I said it the day I heard about it, which,
okay.
So go ahead.
So in follow-up to that, I hear what you're saying. You don't want to step on some director's toes. It causes, can cause some tension in a working relationship, and I get that and I understand that. However, with that spoken, the citizens of Marshfield deserve to know that the downtown park is no longer going to be working, and they deserve to know that it's not going to be available to them for the rest of the summer. So somehow, in my opinion, we need to come to some kind of consensus, and we need to run this through one person. My opinion is that would be our communication director would be running those press releases. Do you guys do a daily huddle where you're updated in the morning?
We, with staff?
All department heads?
No, we don't.
So there's no daily huddle?
We do have
that effect done here?
We have a leadership meeting every 2 weeks and a department head level every 2 weeks. It's every week, but every other week for each one of those. So that's how we do a roundtable, and it's conducted by our
That can happen in 2 weeks.
Oh, definitely. The best thing is to have, work together, call. But again, it's hard to read minds. That's the hardest thing, is you got to be connected at all times with what's going on in almost every department. The communications director is really a high-level position. It is similar to an overall city administrator, just some different duties because of the overall of what communications is about, is at least what I feel it should be. And I think a lot of the citizens and this body feels as well.
Okay. I'm just going to finish up with one more statement. So just to summarize my perspective of everything, I am looking through your job functions. I don't think that all of them are being done on a consistent basis. I would like to leap forward and figure out a way that is going to improve. I'm not casting blame anywhere because I don't know where that's happening at, but I would like to suggest that the department heads work with Tom more often, and that when there's something to be released, that it be run through Tom, and that Tom is the face of the city and releases those. And not just on the city's website, but to other websites, because I do think that there are a lot of things slipping through cracks that are not getting put out to the taxpayers who, by the way, are the ones who are funding the city. So I'm disappointed. I want to see department heads working with Tom at a higher level, and I want to see the city administrator make sure that that is done from this point out.
Mr. Wetzel.
Thank you. Four items in this essential job functions jumps out at me. And before I state that, I want to make it clear that the last 4 years or so, specifically probably about 4 years ago, it was very, very clear that the citizens of Marshfield were not happy, or were not satisfied, I should say, with the amount of communication that the city was providing. Of course, we didn't have a department. We were relying on a third-party individual and a lot of things. I guess when on this council, when I saw this position come up, when I saw this department sort of starting, my personal thought of a communications director was a single point of information that stopped the fragmented communication that the city was providing. Single point of communication, stop the fragmented. Item number 4, creates a consistent communication platform for city staff. Number 6, develops effective relationships with department and division heads, city administrator, mayor, elected officials, key stakeholders, and community organizations to foster positive communication in the city. Number 7, writes, edits, and distributes news releases for the city. Those are just 3 that I just quickly pulled out of this list of 13. Distribution. Bullet number 7, the third item, distributes. Distribution of information. What percentage of the information coming out of the city, and I'm not going to talk about fire and police because they're sort of in their own little world, sort of with their own little group, and I'm not going to talk about utilities because they're sort of on a fringe too. Maybe the library's on a fringe as well. But I'm talking about City Hall, communication coming out of City Hall. What percent do you distribute of the information that gets to the individuals who pay taxes? This is just distribution.
I'm going to give you a low percentage because it's not getting communicated at all.
So you're
30%.
saying 30% of information.
Right.
Okay, now.
I see a lot that could be done.
Okay, so, and again, I'm trying to separate out here a little bit. You think that you communicate 30% of what could be communicated?
That is correct.
Okay, let me take a step outside of that, just a hair. What percent of what's actually communicated do you communicate personally, or does your department communicate? 80%, 90%? Are there, I mean, I'm assuming there are some communications kind of skirting your department?
Yeah, most definitely. It is a higher percentage because of the access we have to the homepage of the website. But generally, Facebook pages are administered, a lot of them by their own departments now, because they have their own, getting more of that wanted. And then the city pages within the website are not done by us, they're done by their staffs, because that's what they requested. So,
Okay.
So that information is not by our department.
So if there's an important bit of news that needs to reach the taxpayers, what's the percentage chance that it'll go through your department? A 70% chance you're going to see it and send it? 30% chance it's going to be sent by the departments, or is it a little bit different than that?
I think it's different than that. I'm going to go back to, I don't think it's reaching.
Okay.
Up. And that's all I can say. I don't think it's reaching. It's not getting out, excuse me.
I don't want to overwork you, but I personally think 100% of communication should come from the communication department. 100% should be distributed. And if you think that you're not distributing 100% of the information, and I'm not necessarily, talking about nice to know things that maybe somebody posts on a web page. I'm talking about Wenzel Family Plaza situation. I'm talking about a major change to Friday City Hall hours. Important information that the taxpayers should know. 100% of that should be coming from you. I would say, yeah, we'll give a little percentage for departments to do little not important things, but I think 100% should be coming from you. As I back through that list, and again, it was writes, edits, distributes, 100% I think should come from the department. Edits, maybe 80%, writes, maybe 50%, maybe the people are drafting, sending to you, you're editing, you're cleaning up, whatever. But I really wholly think that if we're going to provide quality communication and not have fragmented communication continuing, as has been the case, that 100% information needs to go through your department. And I don't know how that works. I don't know if that requires some sort of department update via email, via phone call, via weekly meeting, huddles, daily. I don't know what that looks like. Again, I don't want to overwork people because I know that there's a lot of things on people's plates. But something has to be done to fix the communication situation. You're the guy we hired for the department. Your department, I believe, we put in place to do that. I think it rests with you and your cohort.
Okay, there's a lot to chew on here. I'm gonna try and not make it, I'm gonna try not to bore everybody to death, but one of the things that is coming out, it boils down to something relatively simple. And that is, we need a communications department that is proactive rather than reactive. In other words, we don't need, one of the complaints I got was about from the city was about the new material they were using for seal coating. And apparently some cars sort of splashed oil on themselves and going through it, and they were a little upset. And after the fact, there was a press release coming out. I'm not sure it came out from Tom or if it came out from the Public Works Department saying, oh yeah, we're using something different, so stay off it. And I think they even put some signs up after the fact. But it sure would have been nice if somebody said, we're gonna be using a different material out there, and I think the public needs to know about it. And oh, by the way, it might splash up some cars, so you might want to warn people to stay off it. That didn't happen. We need to be proactive. I talked with one of our staff members a couple of months ago, one of our division heads. And I said, you got this project coming up. I know this is going to be great. There's going to be something you really want to do. Why don't you get with Laux and work out a plan for how you're going to release it, how you're going to roll this out so the public sees it and sees what a great thing it is. It's not happened. It hasn't happened. I talked to Steve about the same thing, the same kind of thing. And I agree with Mr. Laux that there's more he could do. I agree with Mr. Wetzel that basically somebody's got to make sure that if it takes a motion of the council or some kind of a resolution on the part of the council to say, look, here's what we expect out of it, and here we expect the full cooperation of the departments, I'm willing to do that. Because I don't think there's anything wrong with the job description. I think the job description is right on. I just think it's a matter of getting the cooperation and getting the enforcement through the city to get that done. So that's what we need to do. The other thing, one other thing we've got to understand and get through our head is that communications is not public access anymore. It's not the polka party anymore, but it's a much more complex and mature thing, and that needs to be done. We need to look at it that way. If it takes reevaluation of Tom's position and David's position to get them up on a higher level, I'm willing to look at that and look at doing that too. I saw Mr. Pinker waving his hand. Mr. Pinker, did you want to be recognized? Was that what you were doing? Does the council have any objection? Mr. Pinker, please.
Thank you, everybody. I don't know how many times I've been here at this podium addressing communication issues. It's been a lot. I know some of the complaints. Mr. Wagner's referenced some of these to me. I think if we take a look at what is not happening, and we could probably say there's a lot not happening in terms of getting information to us. I think we have to look at this from the same perspective that the emergency services use. You operate in terms of an incident command system. And within the incident command system, you have an incident commander. He
Steve.
sits over there.
Mhm.
Joint Incident Command sitting straight in front of me. But slightly below and off to the side on the organizational chart, you have 3 or 4 people listed. One of those is the press officer or public information officer. Within the emergency operations concept, there is only one person who speaks for incident command. It's not the incident commander. There's only one other person, and that's the press officer. Everything goes through the press officer. No one freelances. And what Tom is saying, we've got a lot of freelancers. Now, before I go, I've got my bicycle out there and I got to scoot home soon. But to paraphrase John Salka, who's a retired battalion chief from FDNY, if you freelance, you get hurt or you kill yourself, or someone else gets hurt or killed. I think what the city has got to ask itself, when people are freelancing with their communications, are they helping themselves? Are they hurting themselves? Are they helping the city? Or are they hurting the city? And certainly ill-advised communications that are not going through a coordinated press officer do have the potential to kill the city in one way or another. Thank you very much.
Are there any other comments? Mr. Fisher, you want to wrap it up briefly?
I think you're implying something here. Now for that, I'm going to keep you guys even longer. But, you know, as I've been listening, I didn't want to say too much on the beginning part because I didn't want to necessarily influence the conversation with my ideas and thoughts. So I just wanted to open up by giving you the background of why I had asked for this to be put on the agenda. But there's a few things that I think when I think of communications. There's the system of the community. There's the system of communications, which I have been hearing a lot about. I mean, you can call that distribution, you can call that whatever you want, but there's a system of how you communicate. Public access is a system. Social media is a system. You can call those platforms too, but I call them systems. And so there are various systems of communication. There's also what I would call the voice of communication, and there's the face of communication. My concern with city communication is I'm not sure there's one voice. And so I think it's easy to have multiple voices communicating various issues throughout the city. What I would like to see, and I'm starting to hear it here, but I just want to make it known, I'd like to see one voice. And so I want everything to funnel to the communications department so they can offer the one voice of the city. Now, I do think Tom will be a face of the city. I don't know if he will be the only face of the city. I mean, when you elect 10 council members, when you elect a mayor, you indirectly have 11 different faces of the city. When you hire a city administrator, you have a face of the city. But I believe there needs to be one voice, and that's where I think we're missing the boat, is our communications department needs to create that one voice, and everything needs to come through so that when the public hears from the city of Marshfield, it's got a certain tone, it's got a certain communication style, and it is the voice of the city. I do want to see Tom as communications director, or long into the future, any of his successors, definitely be a face. And that's why I said I was shocked when they were not a part of that event at the Aquatic Center, because I think that's a key place for the communications director to have, just to be a part of the event, to be a face, to be the MC. You still had an elected official represent the city council, which is also fine. But the voice has to be the communications department. And that is what I think is crucially lacking right now in the city, is we don't have one voice. So thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments? Steve?
Thank you. I'll keep it short. First of all, I greatly respect all the comments that you made, and it's good for me to see things from your perspective in terms of what the public is hearing, how often they're hearing it. Is it a consistent message? I wrote notes while you were talking about volume of information, frequency of distribution, consistent messaging, uniformity, things like that it appears we're falling short on. There's a lot to unpack. I was going to unpack it as some of you were talking, but I think in the interest of time, maybe the better idea is I'm going to challenge our department heads. We have these regular meetings, as Tom mentioned. I'm going to ask them all to watch this piece of video to hear the concerns that are being raised about where we may be falling short in terms of getting information out to the public and what we could do better, and plan to come back to you with a report. I think that'd be probably more appropriate than trying to unpack individual comments that have been made tonight. So thank you very much, and I appreciate it. I do.
Thank you, Steve. Okay, Mr. Wetzel.
Just one quick final thought, I think more to Steve than anything else. It's my understanding, I believe, that there's probably only one department head that maybe has been hired since our communications department started, and that may be our finance director. I don't know if he came before Tom or if Tom was hired after. I don't know. But I think it's going to be a change in mindset. I think it really needs to be emphasized to the department heads, as you said you're going to do. A change in mindset. All communication needs to go to him. If he's not able to communicate, then we have another issue to deal with. But all communication needs to go to him. That's step one. Step two is how much more can we communicate? And that's the other big thing. As Mr. Wagner said, getting out in front of things before it's a response. And I know that there's been lots of things, whether it was when I was a citizen before I was elected or now as elected official, there have been a lot of things that have happened in the city where people said, why weren't we told? Why didn't we know? How were we surprised by this? And that's where the get out in front of it needs to happen. So two shifts in mindset.
Yeah, and I respect it. I know there's a tendency among some staff and some of the projects that Tom would like to get out in front of and start telling the citizens about, and there'll be department heads saying, I don't think it's ripe yet. We haven't cleared this bar yet. I was talking to him earlier today about the city subdivision and, the fact that I know that the Development Services Director wanted to make sure we had successfully acquired the property before we started doing a lot of PR about it. So sometimes there's little disagreements about when something is ready to be publicly known. But I know the kind of things you're talking about. You don't want to be caught off guard. The citizens, there are times when the citizens could know more, even if we don't know everything. Sometimes we feel like we need to know everything before we start putting information out. That's not always the case. Sometimes we need to tell people just how much we do know and that there's an unknown that we need to follow up on. So I hear what you're saying very clearly.
Thank you. And with that, we will move to the next item on the agenda, which is a finance update presented by Ron Alman. Ron? I'm sorry to keep you awake this long, but.
Thank you. Just some very brief updates as we go through the budget process. I'll just try to make sure I let you know where we're at. So today we handed the first pass of the budget off to Steve for review, the general fund and all the special revenue capital projects and related funds. So his job now is to kind of sort through, meet with the department heads and prioritize the items that end up in the administrator's recommended budget. And I can't remember if we mentioned last time, but with the software update, we had been kind of juggling both systems for a while. But recently we've gone through a few months of the month-end financials, run the month-end review, look for issues, roll forward. So I think we are in good shape now. That we kind of got that on a routine schedule in the new system, and it's working well. Starting to review some of the accounting manager estimates and things for budget resolutions that we may need. And we likely will need one for our legal costs that for the year are going to be over budget. So we'll continue to do that. For the stimulus funds, the American Recovery Plan Act, we had our first meeting internally, and that was just, again, the point of that is not decision-making, but there's just so much documentation to go through. We've got some of the technical experts to look at the broadband options and kind of really dig through all the guidance and see what's even allowed, not allowed, and where the information's coming from. So we had our first meeting there and kind of sent everybody off to read their sections of the legislation, the Treasury guidance, and so we'll continue to meet, till we are able to get to the point where we can, have some recommendations or get the council a little bit more involved. So that's really all I had, just update on budget, stimulus, and and where we are with the financial software.
Okay, and you were going to also provide us with some information. Steve sent out the notification of the lawsuit against the city. And I asked Ron to give us just an overview of what the finance looks, what that looks like, so we can sort of get our head around it a little bit.
Sure, and
Not going to take any action on it tonight. We're just basically getting a good briefing and letting the public know where we're at.
sure. So the two parts that you requested, Ed, were, the council denied a claim for recovery of unlawful taxes of about $2.8 million that the clinic is requesting back. And the other part is, what is the assessed value of those two parcels in relation to the city overall assessed value? So the two parcels are about $112 million, and that's 7.4% of our total assessed value. Or if you take out the TIDs, because remember the TIDs don't support the general fund, they support themselves, it's 8% of the assessed value that's not in a TID.
Okay, and basically we've basically put in a response or denying the claim for the 2.8 million. And I know I don't want to talk strategies or anything. That's something we would reserve for a closed session. But that's a big chunk of the property tax revenue we get. That's a pretty big chunk. I mean, we get about what, 17 million in property tax revenue total? 17 or 18 million?
I don't have that in front of me, and it's all split between the various taxing jurisdictions, but it would be 8% of our general fund.
It'd be 8% of our general fund. I can't even imagine us taking a hit of 8% to our general fund. I mean, that's something I think we're going to have to keep a close watch on, well, of course, it's not a matter of. Can you explain why it is that the levy wouldn't actually change, but it would be distributed differently if that lawsuit were successful?
Sure, and this is all, obviously very preliminary, but so the levy limits are based on dollars. We can levy X dollars and increase the levy by X dollars. So in the off chance that, we would lose all the assessed value of those, we could still levy the same amount of dollars without being in violation of the levy limits. It's just spread over
Fewer people.
a much smaller base. So in that scenario, obviously the council could make cuts. We could do those kind of things. If on the other end of the spectrum, if we wanted to keep our general fund and debt service budgets the same, then it just basically shifts that 8% onto everyone else.
Right. And thank you. We'll be hearing more of this as time goes by. I don't know there hasn't been a preliminary court date set, has there, Steve?
No, the city's been assigned an attorney through our insurance company. It's someone from Stafford Rosenbaum, and they've already started working on it. They've asked for a lot of information from me and from the city assessor that they're parsing through right now to make our initial response. But it'll be a road that we'll be walking down. There's no specific dates right now in terms of any proceedings.
Okay, thank you. Any questions, Mr. Handler?
Yeah, Steve and Ron, can you provide this committee either an open session or a closed session, depending upon what, how we approach this, but I'd like to make sure that this committee is apprised of any changes or updates on it, because we don't want to wait till the last minute and then we're faced with our back against a wall and unable to make a proper decision, because ultimately, if we are not successful, quite frankly, what do we do? I think Ron mentioned cuts. Ron mentioned increases in taxes to our citizens. And I think this, we're playing a very nasty game here.
Yeah, I'll keep tabs with the attorney representing us from Stafford Rosenbaum, give you updates as I can in terms of the how solid our case is or isn't, so you know what we're facing. Definitely. I mean, we definitely want to be ahead of it before the day comes that we would find ourselves in a not good settlement or a situation where our chances in court are less than stellar.
There's just one more point, and it has to do with the subject we covered a little earlier, and that is communications. And that is, I want to make sure that we are leveling with the public at every step of the way here and not doing everything behind closed doors like we are wont to do. And sometimes it's very important to do that. Sometimes it's justified, but their public needs to know that their government is not, in our recent experience, I should say, there was a lot of criticism of the Common Council for meeting in closed session and not being able to tell anybody anything or anyhow. We can't let that happen again. We just can't let that happen again. Ms. Spiros.
Again, you guys know I do this. I try to clarify things in my head. So Ron, this is for you. So if Marshfield Clinic prevails in this lawsuit, we would either need to cut services to make up for that lost tax, or we would need to pass off the loss to the citizens who live in this town.
Sure, and that's the standard answer for any property that would come off the tax roll. So we would either.
So cutting services means things like cutting your police department down, your fire department down, your EMS department down, cutting your hours of operation, things like that, correct?
Correct. In the budget, generally the police, fire, streets are 2/3 of the budget. You add library and parks and rec, and that's 85% of the budget in the general fund every year.
Okay, so I wanted to understand that. I wanted the citizens to understand that. There'll be a lot more holes in the street if they prevail.
Steve, you wanted to follow up?
Well, just to follow up on that, it would undoubtedly have to be a combination of service cuts and tax increases if that were to occur. I had a point a minute ago, and you saw me look at you, and I can't remember what it was right now. I'm trying to think back where the conversation was before Rebecca's question, but I'm drawing a
It
blank.
wasn't you wanted to shoot me or anything, was it?
No. And I appreciate these questions, and it's really, it's important that we stay on top of this because, I mean, there's too much at stake for us in terms of the dollars. I know what I was going to comment on, going to closed session, because I agree with you. Sometimes people who monitor us see us going into closed session a lot and wonder how we can do that. The reason we would go into closed session if we did to talk about this topic would be, limited by state law to either if we're negotiating or bargaining in some reason with the clinic, or if our city attorney wants to talk about litigation strategies. Those are the kind of things you don't talk about publicly for obvious reasons. But beyond that, certainly we can share information more openly.
Okay, Mr. Hendler again.
Thank you. We're talking about what to do to ourselves. I would rather talk about what to do with the clinic. This isn't a one-way street. This is a two-way street. Cutting services, laying people off, et cetera, and the list goes on and on. I don't feel comfortable with that. I feel more comfortable doing RFP on insurance and doing the same thing they do to us. I'm sorry, I'm not going to be polite about this. When we're talking this kind of strategy and this kind of money at stake, and the people that are going to suffer from this are the taxpayers. And I really don't like to see a tax increase again. And this will be a substantial one.
Thank you. Steve, the last thing on the agenda for you here is an update of the status on the RFP for assessing services. What do you got?
Yeah, thanks, Dad. I'll keep it fairly short, not just because this meeting's run long, but I really don't have a whole lot to share. I just wanted you to know this wasn't lost. A couple months ago, we talked about doing an RFP for assessing services. Been looking at it, working on it. We got some samples from other communities, and we kind of got to the point where we took a step back and said, look, we'd like to do a more detailed analysis of what ought to be in that RFP. What are we looking for? Rather than just recycling the one from 2017. So got a team of staff people working on this. I've talked to Groda, and they understand. We hope to be able to complete the process during calendar year 2021. That's still the goal. And I think it's still achievable, but did float with them the idea that if it spills into early 2022, would they be able to work with us? And it seems like they will. So we'll give you more significant update in September, probably be in front of you with an RFP at that point, hopefully. I just wanted you to know it wasn't lost, quite frankly, that we're still working on soliciting proposals for assessing services.
Thank you. Okay, suggested items for future agendas. Anybody? Pete?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just can't get my mind off the subject, so I'm going to return to the same tirade. I would like to have on the next agenda for the Finance and Budget Committee, I would like to have the subject of this body to do, the things to do if we're not successful with the clinic. I would like to create a list of things that we will take on as a part of that. Is that possible, Mr. Chair?
I'll defer to Steve's judgment on that one. Steve, can you weigh in on that?
Well, I mean, it's just a matter of where to put time and resources. Like Ron just said, he handed off the department budgets to me today, which, by the way, I want to thank you all for supporting the upgrade in software that you funded recently. I mean, that's made the budget process so much better here. I can't even put it into words. But I'll be spending time looking at the department budgets, what we can fit into the 2022 proposal, and it's going to be tight again, which I think you realize. I mean, we can certainly have some initial discussion and review of what might take a hit. And I think Ron mentioned the areas that most of the money, on the budget is in certain departments, certain areas, because, that's where the most emphasis is. You talk public safety and those kind of things. I guess I'm hoping you're not talking about specific, cuts and specific reductions at this point. I think it's premature. I know that there's concern about where this is going to lead, and 8% of our total assessed value is nothing to sneeze at. I guess I just don't know how far you're talking about going at this point, in the next couple of weeks to have something to look at and talk about. So, I mean,
Mr. Wagner.
You want to bring it to the council or to this committee?
To the committee first and then go to council.
I think we'll do less harm here.
I prefer to wait a little bit longer than a couple of weeks, and I'm not trying to put you off. I get the sense of urgency, and I don't want to take that away because, if we lost that much revenue, if we lost the whole thing, and remember, it's not necessarily a win or lose at all. It's not an A or B. It could be somewhere in between where parts of these properties are deemed to be tax exempt and other parts aren't. But I just don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. Maybe we can come up with some idea of the types of, the depth of reductions that might be necessary from a dollar standpoint without identifying specific areas. I'm hesitant to talk in those terms right now. But I'll do what you asked me to. I mean, that's why I'm here. So.
Well, may
yes,
I
you have the
continue?
floor. Go ahead.
I think, Steve, I would agree with you. I think we need to follow this rather carefully, but diligently. I don't want it to be forgotten because the rape and pillage will happen. Sorry.
Yeah. Any other comments? If any, no items for the next agenda at all, right? You're okay, Steve, you got everything?
Nothing I can think of offhand.
Okay.
I looked to Jen and Ron to see if they know of anything coming around the bend.
Okay, and with that, I'll declare the meeting adjourned.